friends, this is Chris of Light and Joy Designs, and today I'm going to teach you how to knit the mystical Aura Knit Shawl. This is a shawl that I offer for free on my website, lightandjoydesigns.com. The pattern there is free, and if you would like a convenient printed copy PDF, you can purchase that on Ravelry or Etsy. It's very inexpensive, and it also comes with this handy pattern counter chart, and I'll show you how to use that in this video. So let's get started. The materials you'll need for today's shawl are 1 skein of shawl in a ball. I used about 2/3 or 3/4 of a skein to make my shawl that was 75 inches wide wingspan and about 27 inches from top to bottom. And the colorway that I used was Calming Desert, and this has these colors. It's got an olive green, some cream, purple, fuchsia, pink, and orange. The other items you will need are a tapestry needle, 2 stitch markers, a pair of scissors, a measuring tape, and US size 11 8mm circular knitting needle, and I used the Susan Bates version. So let's learn how to make this. Okay, so the next section after the stockinette section is this garter section. It might be a little harder to see it because the stitches are so loose, but garter section is where you knit on the right side and you knit on the wrong side as well. Then the next section is a lace section, and this is worked with knitting 2 stitches together on one side and purling stitches on the other side. Then the last portion of the pattern is we repeat the garter section again for another 4 rows. So it's 10 rows of stockinette, 4 rows of garter, 6 rows of lace, 4 rows of garter. And then you just repeat that continuously until you get the garment to be the length that you desire. As you are knitting this garment, this edge will be on your needles. So this is the edge on which you will bind off. And as you're knitting, your top edge is the edge that will grow out and out and out. And we'll see that as we make the sample. Okay, let's get started on that. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start by making a slip knot. Make a loop. And this is our tail end. And this is our working end. We put the working end through the loop. Put it onto our needle and tighten. But not too tight. The stitches are too tight. It's a little hard to work with them. Okay, then we're going to cast on 1 more stitch We put the tail over our thumb, come through that loop, pull up from the working end, and that's your second cast on. So just two stitches cast on, 1, 2. Now we're going to knit this for 7 rows, and that creates a garter, a small little tab of garter stitch. That's 1. That's 2. Three. Four. Five. Six. Oh. 6. And one more. That's 7. Okay. And it might look kind of weird and not very neat, but it's got what we need. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to pick up the little purl loops, and let's show you where those are. We've got one here, we've got one here, and we've got one here. So we're just gonna, we don't even have to use the other needle. We're gonna put our needle through those and through each one, and as we go we're going to knit that stitch, creating another stitch on our needle. So now we have 3. We're going to add another one. We're going to knit that stitch by coming around and just pulling that loop over. And then our third purl loop. And pull that over. And the last part is we're going to pick up the 2 bottom stitches that we cast on originally, and we're going to knit those. Just pull the yarn over that. Okay, and then the last one here. Okay. And so now you can see we've got this nice little garter tab that will, as I showed you when we looked at the actual shawl, this is the very beginning of your top edge of your shawl. And we're starting here with 7 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches on our needle. Okay, so now we're ready to knit our first row of the first section called the Stockinette section. And before we begin that, I just want to point out that for every row of this entire pattern, the first two and the last two stitches are always knit on both wrong side and right side rows. And you're always going to have this center stitch, which is going to be isolated by 2 stitch markers, and we'll place those as we do the first row. So the first thing we do is we knit 2. We do a yarn over, which is you take your yarn, you come down, because your yarn is in the back of your needle. We're going to come down and under your working needle and then up towards the top. Then we're going to knit the next stitch, and now we're at our center stitch, so we're going to place a marker. Then we knit that center stitch. We're going to place another marker, and that's going to isolate that stitch. Then we do another yarn over. And we knit. And we're down to our last 2. So we do another yarn over, and then we knit those last 2. So the yarn overs in this is a right side row. This is row number 1 of the Stockinette pattern. You have a total of 4 yarn overs. It's the third to last stitch on either end. And you have 2 other yarn overs, which are right before and after your stitch markers. So it's coming basically before and after the center stitch. And those 4 yarn overs create an increase of 4 stitches on every right side row. And throughout the pattern, you're going to always have those yarn overs on your right side rows. It's always going to be a row 1. And so you're always having an increase of 4 stitches on every right side row. Okay, so now we're going to do the second. Okay, so now before we do row 2 of the Stockinette pattern, let me just pull out this pattern counter and show you how to use it. The way that this pattern works, as I showed you earlier, you have a stockinette section, garter, lace, garter, and you just repeat this basic pattern or collection of patterns continuously until you have the size shawl that you desire. This pattern counter will show you each section, if you follow the color across, how many rows to do. So for instance, for the stockinette section, it's always 10 rows total. And so as you finish them, you'll just mark off with an X that you've completed that row. So we've done row 1, we would put an X here. After we complete row 2, we put an X here, and that will help you to keep track. When you're done all the rows of the stockinette section, you come down to the garter section and you do 4 rows of that section. When you're done there, you come down to the lace section and do 6 rows of that pattern, and then 4 more of the garter section, then it starts all over. So that's how that works. All right, so what we'll do here is we're going to do row 2, and we start by knitting 2. 1, 2, And everything else in this row is going to be purl. So we're going to purl. We have to bring our yarn to the front for the purl stitch. So we're going to purl all the way across. We're going to carry our stitch marker over, and we're going to purl the center stitch. Slip our marker, and then we're going to purl all the way until the last 2 stitches. We're at the last 2 stitches, and first 2 and last 2 are always knit, so we're going to knit those. Okay, and we've just completed row 2, and so we would take our pattern counter and we would put an X in the second row 2. So we're going to do, we'll do 2 more rows of this section. So we're back to a row 1, and again we do a knit 2, 1, 2, and we do a yarn over. That's 1 increase, and we're going to knit all the way across until we get to the stitch marker where we will do another yarn over. So here we do knit, knit, and we're at our stitch marker, so we're going to do a yarn over. We're going to slip our marker, and then we're going to knit the center stitch. And then we're going to slip the marker, and we always do another yarn over. That's another increase after that center stitch. Now we're going to knit across again until we get to the last 2 stitches. And we do a yarn over, and then we knit the last 2 stitches. Okay, so now we have done our 3rd row. We'll do another row 2 next, which will be our 4th row altogether. And again, that's going to be knitting 2 on the first 2 and the last 2, and everything else is going to be a purl. So just make sure your yarn is on top of your circular needle before you start. So we're going to knit 2, and this knitting 2 on the beginning 2 stitches and the last 2 stitches creates a garter edge across the top of your entire shawl. So we bring the yarn to the front now because we're going to purl the rest of these stitches. Okay, then we're going to slip our marker over, We're going to purl the center stitch. Slip our marker, and then we're going to purl all the way back to the other end to the last 2 stitches. Okay, this is our last stitch before the last 2 stitches, and we're going to put our yarn in the back and knit those 2. Okay, so now we've completed a total of 4 rows. We would have 1, 2, 3, 4 yellow boxes checked off. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to knit the rest of these, and I'll come back and meet you for the garter section. Okay, so before we go to the garter section, I just wanted to show you the last, I'm just going to knit the last 2 rows of the Stockinette section. You can see I've done a total of 8 rows so far. We've got the last 2 to do. Because I just want to point out to you a few things that you may encounter as you're doing this first section. One of the things is, especially if you're new to knitting, that circular needles can be a little awkward, and they can feel like they're getting in the way. I find that if you can find a way to straighten out the cord a little bit by kind of bending it, that helps. Or if you buy a more expensive one, like the bamboo ones, the cord is a little bit more flexible, and it's a little bit less in the way of your work. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that when you're first starting out, you probably know this from most knit and crochet projects. When you're first starting out any project, the knitting and the crocheting feels like it's so flimsy and that it's not going to come together and look so nice. But just trust it. Just keep sticking with it, and as it builds, it will get easier to knit, and it will start to look like a real garment. So, and especially with this one, since we're using large needles, the stitches are really loose, and the project can feel really flimsy at first. But try not to worry about that, and just stick with it, and you'll be really pleasantly surprised. So we're going to do the last 2 rows of the Stockinette section now. So we're back to a row 1, where we're going to start by knitting 2. And then we're going to do our increase by doing a yarn over. And actually, I did not get my yarn on top, so let me just pull this through. So we're going to yarn over. Let me get some yarn out here. So we've done our yarn over. And now we're just going to knit all the way across till we get to our stitch marker, and then there'll be another yarn over. So also when you're knitting with the circular needles, I find that it's helpful as I make each stitch, the needle tends to kind of twirl this way, and if I just push the work down a little bit with my thumb, it keeps things a little bit more straight. So you can test that out, see if that works for you. So we're just going to knit across now. Okay, and now we're at our stitch marker, so we're going to do another yarn over. That's going to be another increase. I'm going to slip the marker over. We're going to knit the center stitch, slip our other marker over, do another yarn over, which is another increase, and we're going to knit all the way across up until the last 2 stitches. So we're going to knit across now. Okay, now we're at the last 2 stitches, which means it's time for another increase, another yarn over. Pull the yarn under and over the top of our working needle, and we're going to knit the last 2 stitches. Sometimes when you're knitting loosely, this little bar right here, sometimes your needle can go under that by accident, so if it does, just pull it back out and get it into the right space. Okay, so now I also want to just point out to you that this pattern, the way that it works, you will have these loops all the way around here where your yarn overs occur, and it's going to be a really pretty effect when it's all done. This garter edge is your growing top edge. It's the growing top edge of your shawl, and when the time comes to figure out when is it time to bind off, you're going to measure from here right down to the center line and just multiply by 2, and then you'll have that top length, that top wingspan of your shawl. And once it measures about anywhere from 60 to 80 inches, you could even have it be 90 inches if you want it to be really big and long, be able to wrap it around a few times. The one that I made is 75 inches across and 27 inches from the top down to the bottom corner. So I'll just show you one other thing. When this is all done, I'll show you how this is, when your shawl is completed, it's going to be like this. So you can see this is, whoops, this is your top edge, and this is going to be your bottom corner of your shawl. So we can see it's growing. So we've got one more row to do of the stockinette pattern, sorry, the stockinette section. And we'll go ahead and do that now. So our yarn is on top of that cord, and we're going to start by knitting the first 2 stitches. And then we're going to bring our yarn to the front because we're going to purl all the way across, including slipping the markers, until we get to the last 2 stitches, which we will knit. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Purling all the way across. Okay, now we're at the last 2 stitches, so we're going to move our yarn to the back and we're going to knit these last 2 stitches. Okay, so now our first whole section is completed. We've done 10 rows of stockinette, and we can see we've got these nice loops where we're increasing at the beginning, these nice loops along the center column, and again over here on this side. All right. Okay, so now we're going to do the garter section. And the garter section is going to be a total of 4 rows, and we're repeating a row 1 and row 2 basically twice. And the garter section is the first row is we are going to basically do the exact same row 1 as we do in the stockinette section. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we're going to start by knitting 2. And again, we're going to have a yarn over after the first 2. We're going to have a yarn over before the first stitch marker. We're going to have a yarn over after the second stitch marker. And then we're going to have a yarn over before the last 2 stitches. And all the other stitches are going to be knit. So I'm going to go ahead and knit across and we'll speed this up for you. Okay, we're at our place marker, so we're going to do another yarn over, a knit, slip the marker, and another yarn over, and now we're going to knit across to the last 2 stitches. Okay, we've got 2 stitches left, so we're going to do another yarn over, another increase, and knit 2. Okay, so that is row 1 completed of garter. So now we're going to move on to row 2, And row 2 is, if we look at it as a whole, it's going to be, we're going to be knitting across. So before our row 2 was a purl across. What creates the garter stitch is by doing knit on both sides, both right side and wrong side. And since we have those yarn over increases, there's just going to be one slight change, and that comes everywhere there's a yarn over. So at the third stitch and the third to last stitch, and then those 2 stitches that are on either side of the stitch marker, on those ones you're going to do something called knit through the back loop. And I'm going to show you that. Okay, so let's start. So we're going to start with a knit 2. Okay, so now we have this yarn over here, and since we're knitting and not purling, what we're going to do is we're going to knit through the back side of this loop. So we're going to stick it through the back of that loop. We're going to knit it from behind. Slide that off. And then the rest of the stitches are knit the rest of the way. The normal way through the front loop until we get to the stitch marker. Until we get to the next yarn over stitch, which is right before the stitch marker. So we're just going to knit all these. Okay, so now we are at that yarn over stitch right before the stitch marker, and again we're going to knit this through the back loop. We go through that back loop, and then we knit that stitch. Okay, slip the marker, knit the center stitch, slip our marker, then we have another yarn over stitch, so we're going to knit through the back loop, and again sometimes it feels like it's messy, but just trust it, it's all going to work out. And now we're going to knit the rest of these the regular way until we get to the third to last stitch, which will be that yarn over stitch, which we will also knit through the back loop. And here we can see sometimes stitches get overlapped. See how those 2 stitches are a little crossed? Just go ahead and loosen those up and then continue. Knit. Okay, and now we're at our third to last stitch, which is another yarn over. And since we're knitting, we're going to knit it through the back loop. Sometimes it's a little hard to get it through that back loop. Okay, so we got that. Bring the yarn over. And we just knit the last 2 stitches. 1 2. Okay, so now this is our wrong side, and I'm going to flip it over and show you the right side and what just happened. By knitting that wrong side, we now have these little purl loops on this side, and that's just going to give us a little bit of texture before and after our lace section. It's kind of like a nice little separator between the stockinette section and our lace section. So we've done the first 2 rows of this garter section. I'm going to finish these 2 rows, and then I'm going to meet you back here for the lace section.